Welcome to the Fulcrum Roundtable. The program provides insights and discussions about some of the most talked about topics of the previous month with the Fulcrum's collaborators. Consistent with the Fulcrum's mission, the Fulcrum Roundtable strives to share many perspectives to widen our audience's viewpoints. I'm Hugo Balta, Executive Editor of the Fulcrum and your host. Today we are joined by members of the Fulcrum NextGen initiative, nurturing the next generation of journalists. Last month, the Fulcrum asked students to answer what democracy meant to them, and based on that answer, what is the health of democracy? Nathaly, Layla, Angeles, thank you very much for joining us today. Angeles, I'd like to start the conversation with you. Last month, you authored Faith, Democracy, and the Catholic Duty to Stay Involved. Tell us a little bit more about the article you wrote.
Yeah, so the article stemmed from a conversation that you and I had, and it was about me giving my point of view as someone who has worked in politics for a long time and now covers politics from a journalistic lens. So the article started off by, me explaining my experience in politics and how, as a legislative aide, I kind of had my hands tied. I'm a Catholic before anything. And in politics, there wasn't a lot of room for me to do much except do my work. So I ended up leaving politics, became a journalist. And then when it came time to covering these political ideas and concepts, I noticed that my Catholic friends didn't have a home. They were very politically disillusioned. They didn't see anyone in politics who reflected what they believed in, or they didn't see anyone locally who was supporting what they support. So I decided to write this article to be like, hey, like, the Catholic Church does give us a really great guide on how we should be civically engaged, but also how we should vote, what should matter the most to us when we're going to the ballot. So at the end of the day, there is a home for us in politics. And if not, then it's time to become that home.
As you mentioned, even though there's a separation of church and state in government, there is room for religion, especially in how it helps us in how do we conduct ourselves, whether it's discussion and debate. Layla, speaking of disillusionment, Layla, you mentioned in your column, disillusionment isn't the end, but the beginning of change. You asked yourself, why am I not excited about the idea of American democracy? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so, when I first think of democracy, I can't help but first think of my own family and how it's been impacted by it. My dad fought in the war in former Yugoslavia and he came to the US. My mom, who left Bosnia to go to Germany as a refugee and came to the US that way. And they met and they were able to start over literally. I mean, they had me and my sister and they learned English and they assimilated into American culture and they were able to just like start over, find peace in what was, so much violence and chaos that they had left. So I feel kind of indebted to American democracy in a way because of that. I feel like I wouldn't be here without it, like honestly. So I feel like really connected to it in that way. But at the same time, it's really hard for me to not take into account what I'm seeing today. Marginalized groups, migrants, refugees, immigrants. That I mean, of course, it marginalized groups goes more than just, those three, the communities, but it's hard for me to not take into account that as well. And of course, so many systems in America are broken and they've been broken for a very, very long time. But it's just hard for me to ignore that. And we've what we're seeing today is unlike what we've seen before. I don't know, it's just hard for me to just go past that and say, you know what? America is the greatest country on earth, and I hear that I heard that so much growing up too, like in history and from like my teachers, and I have pride in some way because of what it's done for my family. And I know that the American dream can be real, but I don't know if the path that democracy is going down right now is what I can stand for as an American. I see what's possible, but I don't agree with what's happening now.
Yeah, some very difficult questions that everybody is introspecting about. And I certainly want to circle back with you and Nathaly to talk a little bit more about, from your perspective, you are all much younger than I am, and the people that are making the decisions that will inevitably affects all of us, but inevitably will have repercussions, will affect you more than it's affecting me. Nathaly, let's move to you and let's talk about as Layla mentioned, when she thinks about democracy, she thinks, of course, of herself, but her family. But you wrote in your article the responsibility of the first vote. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I just want to say I definitely agree with what Lila mentioned earlier, and it kind of dwells into this article. And so for me, my parents are immigrants, so I'm a first generation American here. And so my parents, my mom is Colombian and my dad's Ecuadorian, came here pretty much to have a better life and to give what my sister and I, to thrive and, do all these things. And so for me, deciding on what to vote on and democracy for me doesn't just count like about like what I believe in, but it's also what my family would benefit because since they can't vote. And so part of the article, I speak a lot about people who you have lived so long in the US and haven't had the chance to vote or they don't have a voice in the ballot. And so for me, it's more counting towards what my parents, along with me, vote for and what we believe in. And although it is broken, I definitely agree with that. I think part of the article that I mentioned and is more for to like continue on and like not give up. And so I feel like people have given up a lot. And I think, yeah, all these things are getting cut, like the DEI immigration status is insane right now. But I think the more we talk about it, the more we write about it, just word to word mouth, I think somehow we can help. I know it's not, I'm just saying this is just a small part, but I think just if continuing having these conversations are really crucial for what we want to do and hopefully make a change in some way.
Now, all of you are working with the Fulcrum through the NextGen initiative. And for us, it was really important to provide our platform for a lot of what all of you have said, and really for your voices and perspectives to be seen and heard. Um, and starting with you, Nathaly, I'd like to hear your thoughts about the importance of having your generation's voice and perspectives seen and heard. Too often, and I mentioned it earlier, people who are making decisions are people who look like me about what's going to affect you the most. From a journalistic standpoint, how important is it for your perspective, again, to be seen and heard?
I think it's crucial. I think our generation is able to have that push towards people and having that impact. I'm seeing it everywhere. I mean, I all my friends are super into um like what's going on, and so they repost things, they talk about it. We have these sort of conversations and within my circle, and then from that we can talk to like older people, like for example a lot of the things my parents don't understand, or even just in general having these conversations are really crucial, and just talking peers to peers, slowly kind of gaining a bigger, I guess, like circle to try to see what we could be doing differently, just going on and talking. And I think it's really crucial right now. um and I don't know, I think social media has helped a lot, although it also has not helped. It's a whole black, like it's two-sided, but the good part of it is that social media is somewhat impacting and making a difference and entering these people's like mind and trying to see what we can do about what's going on currently.
Yeah, I think social media can be such a powerful tool. And yes, it's a double-edged sword. It could be a great tool for connecting in a way that otherwise people who are separated, not just by distance, but also by ideology. But then also we've seen rampant misinformation that then feeds to the polarization that we see in our country. Lila, the same question for you. If you could share your thoughts about the importance of having a platform to be able to tell stories that draw from your lived experiences.
Yeah, I mean, everything that Nathalie just said, I mean, it's so important, at least for me, is helping people who don't feel heard. Coming from, I'm a first generation American as well, and I think it's so important for marginalized communities to have that voice, people who are unable to be heard, going out and intentionally listening. And I think too, having that curiosity is so important today, especially. I mean, so much of our society is not like stagnant. It's like a living, I know they always say like democracy is always like a living, breathing thing, but I think so much of our society is living, you know. So we have the power to influence that, and I think remembering the power of your voice, no matter if it's just you individually, if you're part of a group, you know, it's so important to make yourself heard. And as journalists too, it's our job to go out and listen to those that are not being heard. And I think that's something that I always just try to remember is, that's why I'm a really big advocate for that, coming from a marginalized community myself. I know what it's like to not feel heard. And this is our country, no matter if you're born here or not, in the first place, your country of origin is somewhere else, this is our place where we can make it what we want. So I don't know, I try to always lead with that in mind, you know what I mean?
Yeah, certainly. And I think each of you have demonstrated, have provided such a different, unique perspective to the fulcrum that without you, to be honest, we would not have. So I really appreciate the diversity of thought on topics that, these are, we're not talking about foreign topics. We're talking about things that are happening today, but from a very different perspective. And Angeles, to wrap it up with you, as someone who chose journalism because, again, of the disillusionment of government, so far so good. I mean, has the reasons for moving to journalism met your expectations in regards to having a platform to be able to not only for yourself to be seen and heard, but also other communities?
Oh, definitely. I do not regret changing from politics to journalism. I think that right now, at least the way that I would categorize my type of journalism is more so direction based. So it is giving people a voice because I do work with a lot of immigrants in immigration reporting in general. But to me, it's more so okay, these politicians that I used to work for maybe don't have the greatest legislations, maybe they don't have a sense of how to talk to people. A lot of it is really how do you communicate with people, how do you get your message across. And if it wasn't for journalism, I don't think people would have that middle ground person to say, hey, like this was said, but this is really what they mean, or these are the facts, or this is, the direction in which maybe I think or the publication thinks that you guys should lean towards something. And I think that's important. That's what our generation needs, is not just someone that's throwing things at them in a political sphere, but also directing them and sort of explaining to them the breakdowns of what all the legislation is or what the political rhetoric is.
I agree with you 100%. I often preach about it's in the prerogative, the main focus of a news outlet is to inform, and that's good, but everybody does that. I think it's better to inform and also educate. So a lot of what you talked about. And why that's so important is because if you inform and educate, then you empower the community to act, to become much more civically involved, because now they better understand how both federal, state, and local government work. Last question for all of you, and I'll start with you, Angeles. And it's a critique, not just in mainstream media, but I'm also looking for critiques for the fulcrum. What's missing in news media from your perspective that, beginning with the fulcrum, we can aspire to do better?
That's such a good question. I think more complexity. When I used to be a reader, when I was, working for politicians, you have to read a lot of news just so you know what your public is thinking of you, what your community is thinking of you. And at least for my friends, what we always discuss is that these issues are so complex, and sometimes I feel like the news, this is my own personal opinion, I feel like the news dumbs it down to either this is great or this is bad. And sometimes it's okay to have an article that's just a pure conversation about a topic. That would be my 2 cents. I see that too with my writing and what I'm trying to do. Um, I'll give an example. I just released a piece about, the fentanyl crisis at the border. And as most articles would say, oh, like it's not working well. Obviously, we still have an opioid crisis here in the United States. But the way that I look at it, there needs to be more conversation as to why it's not working, not just policy bad and people just fall into drugs. It should be okay, but why are people falling into drugs? Why do we continue to push out the same policies when they're not working? So I think that would be my only critique is I think it's okay to have that complexity and also maybe drive from people's experiences that may not fit the mainstream ideology. Again, I say that because I'm very thankful the Fulcrum gave me a space to talk about Catholicism and politics, whereas a lot of people would maybe get scared about, diving into the intersection that those two can have.
Yeah, no, and happy to do it. And I think a lot of what you described, for me, I heard solutions journalism, right? We can't just focus on the problem. What's the response to the problem? And there's too often, in mainstream media, mostly one-dimensional narratives, right? Oversimplistic reporting about complex issues. And as you mentioned, dumbing it down to two sides. There are multiple sides to every story. To just water it down to two sides is a disservice to the people, that the journalists are serving. I think a lot of times, and I've given you that pizza pie analogy, is to just say, just report on one piece of the pie and be transparent about it. And people will understand, okay, got it. This is a pizza pie, but you're just talking to me about one slice. And it'll be easier for them to understand. And then you can revisit that same story and do another piece of that pie. Again, great advice and something that I certainly, as a journalist and as an editor, strive to be better at. Layla, your thoughts?
I think Angeles touched on a lot of things that I agree with. Complexity is so important. And when you were talking about complexity, Angeles, I was thinking about like I feel like I think recently media has gotten a little bit better at this from what I've seen, but I think humanizing people who I don't know how to say it, like who are like in a bad light, I guess, or who are, like marginalized, I keep going back to marginalized communities, but like, marginalized communities, I feel like are dehumanized in so much of the media that I've seen. And I think recently with everything that's been going on politically, I think I've seen some media do a better job of people like making people in what we're reading and what we're seeing. But I think that's something that I would like to see more. And I try to do that in my writing as well. And not that it's about me, but I think that's something that we can all do, try to be mindful of because, the stories we're telling, they're not stories about policy or they're not just about policy. It's not just about, an event that's going on. It's not just about whatever, it's about people, it's about us, it's about our communities. So I think that's something that we should try to do better at. Um, and again, I think solutions journalism is a nice element to have to writing. I mean, I feel like so much of what I'm seeing too is so negative, and it really puts me in a bad headspace, honestly, when I see a lot of media, because I feel like it's just so, of course, there's bad things going on in the world, and there's, of course, we can't ignore that. But I think offering some solutions or offering some hope in our work and what we do can be really like enlightening for readers and I don't know, I feel like everybody I know is going through it right now, and I think offering some sort of hope is really needed, especially today.
Yeah, and it's not about ignoring that there are problems, like you said, but it's really about highlighting, well, what's being done about it. And you made an important point, and humanizing those efforts. So often, um, it, it's whittled down to statistics and demographics, and it's not a real person. It's just a number. Immigration being one of those complex issues, when it's often covered, it's about statistics of undocumented immigrants, statistics about arrests, very seldom about the people behind those numbers. And when you humanize people, now it becomes real, right? Now the decision makers, it's not a number on a ledger, it's affecting real people, men and women, parents, children. And that's so important. And especially with solutions journalism, similarly, it's about elevating their visibility and voice because a lot of times the solutions to the problems aren't coming from elected officials, from people in power. They're really, it's the community that's rolling up their sleeves and finding those answers. Nathaly, finally, we get to you. What can you offer in regards to what can we be doing better at the Fulcrum and on mainstream media?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with everything that was being said here. It's touching pretty much in what I was also going to say and mention. I was thinking from like my background and my family kind of, and so I think having more accessibility is can help a lot having all these translations done, even though, for example, like my parents who can vote, having those translations in Spanish helps a lot, right? Because ultimately, yes, I'm going to be the one voting, but they are informed, I'm informed. And so I think having that information out available to anybody who wants to read, listen, or watch, I think is really important. And also starting from like young kids, I think it's really important to have these conversations as a little kid, as when you're like 5 years old. I think speaking to like your cousins, right, your little cousins, or having these conversations growing up, I think is really important because for me, I was not really informed till I got pretty much to high school, right? I never had these meaningful conversations before. Yes, I heard a little bit about the news here and there, but I was never really informed enough to be like, yo, you know what? Let me speak to somebody who can vote. Maybe like vote for this person, right? I never felt like that up until I was more informed and I discussed it. And I went home and like read all these things. I was the one who did all these research. But, for the normal average person, I think that's kind of a lot of work. And I think just having more information super easy to find, having conversations at school, peers, teacher talking about it, I think is really important to start off with. And then from there, they can, take it and see what they could do with it. But just having these conversations super early, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's another great point. I think um, all of you are new voters, right? You're new to the electorate um, process, but statistically speaking, Democrats and Republicans, the two major parties, ignore you because they really focus on tried and true voters, right? They're focusing their energy to a demographic that votes, and that's seniors, people 50 and over. But there's a misconnection there because there needs to be an emphasis on new voters, whether they're by age or naturalized citizens, new to the system, in order for them to make better, not only be inspired to participate, but make better informed decisions that affect them, like budgets for schools and green spaces and small business owners, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you're right. I think with the Fulcrum, NextGen is just the first step. I think we should be focusing, maybe the next layer will be high school, and integrate some of what you've all experienced in with the Fulcrum and with high school students, and then also partnering with those schools as well. I think
Yeah.
the more conversations, to your point, that we have, the better.
Yeah, sorry. And I will say, like, for me, my sister's 3 years younger than me, and so she was not aware of anything. Like we had like local government, local elections here, and this year was the first time she's ever voted. And she's like, "Who do I vote for?" I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm not gonna make that decision. Here's all the information that I have. I'll like do it in bullet points. This is one, this is another person. You decide what works best for you." And see what you do from it. And I think just doing that super easy and like I think it made her be like, okay, you know what? I'll go with you and I'll vote for this person. And so things like that I think helps a lot. And like I converted my sister to like a voter, registered voter, which for me was a win. I thought that was a really good like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I got to somebody today.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you're referencing the 2024 presidential election.
We had like a local election
Okay,
back
good.
months like in our town. But yes.
Perfect. And because I was going to say there's such a need for that type of election guide, not just when it's the marquee presidential election, but the state and at the local level. I think that's really important. And that's something, again, that we in media can do better. Nathaly, Layla, Angeles, time really well spent. I've enjoyed working with you and continue to enjoy working with you. Thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
And thank you all for joining us. Visit us at the fulcrum.us and check out their great work. This is the Fulcrum Roundtable, insights and discussions about some of the most talked about topics of the previous month with Fulcrum collaborators. Amugo Alta, hasta la próxima.
Come on!